Hello, this is going to be about dimensions. What you see here is an unfinished rendering. There's still some grain and grizzle in here of an image where dimensions are critical. This creature here in the center of the scene is small compared to what? Well, he's not small compared to the car, really. He's just the right size compared to the car, but he's small compared to that spaceship or jet fighter, and small compared to the mountain range here. The scene gets even more dramatic if you render it with motion blur, which is this snapshot I rendered. So now you have the speed of this thing in addition to the dimensions in the whole scene. So it's a big ship here, small person, and pretty small car, and a high mountain range. If we go closer to that man and actually place the camera at his knee and render the whole shot to the top, it looks like this. The rendering is not finished. You see grain here, but the motion blur is here. The motion blur is in that creature because he's actually walking, but the motion blur is not in the mountain because the mountain is not moving. So when we talk about dimensions today, this is the scene we have. Dimensions in computer animation and computer graphics dimensions are extremely important. The size of creatures, of cars, of landscapes, etc. They all need to be in harmony with each other. And our natural view, like we see the real world, is so much used to the size of cars, the width of roads, the size of certain animals. The bee is much smaller than the cat, for example. This is all trivial, but in computer animation we need to adjust the dimensions. So when we start with our landscape, and for example with a polygon plane, go to polyplane here and make it bigger like this, we can ask ourselves the question, is it big enough? So there's a general rule which I've heard of, which says that this square here is 1 square meter. So this is 1 meter. A creature like a human, tall human man would be 2 meters high. So if we lay him down on the ground, he would just fill this space, for example. A car would be like 4 meters, maybe like this. This would be the size of a car. So this is the units is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's a pretty small, big landscape. It's not really big. So let's make it even bigger like this. We could make it 1000, for example. Now it stops at 100. And since we want to deform it in order to create a mountain range, we will add subdivisions. And since this is not a computer game, we can be easygoing with the resolution here. The best thing to create a mountain range and deform such a surface is using the sculpt tools, and they are here under mesh tools. You find the sculpting tools, lots of them, and we need the first one, which is called just sculpt tool. And it starts out with this circle, and if we press and hold the key B, we can scale the circle down. For a big landscape mountain range, this is just fine for me. And now if you have a graphics tablet, it's pressure sensitive, really fun. With a mouse, what I'm using right now, it's still a little bit of fun, and this is how it all turns out. So we create a huge mountain here, really high up. And we go to the mesh tools again, sculpting tools, and flatten tool. And now we flatten it a little bit. I decrease the size of my pen, and we flatten it here. So that's just fine now. And maybe even steeper up, sculpting tool, sculpt tool, like this. Here, yeah. A real aggressive, impressive mountain range here. It's lovely to make. You will enjoy it. Just do it. You can relax the geometry if it's too harsh. Lots of sculpting tools really, which we don't want to indulge in right now. Okay, let's go to this arrow now in order to leave the sculpting tool, and right mouse click, add a new material. We use an Arnold standard surface shader, and we reduce the specular weight from 1 to 0, so it's not shiny anymore and it's white. So let's introduce a ramp. If this goes too quickly, it's all covered in other tutorials. So the ramp currently goes from black to white. Let's make it green here, a dark green like this. Move it in here, and here we will introduce sort of green brownish like this, and the very top can be snow white. If anybody sees this, yes, I think that's fine for now. Okay, so this is a landscape maybe 100 meters wide, this time these dimensions here, and sitting in the center of the scene. So this is the only object we have. We hide it, Control H, and now we introduce a walking creature. Windows, General Editors, Content Browser, and you have to, maybe you have a different arrangement in your computer, my setup maybe, but here I find it under Examples, Animation, Motion Capture, and for example the walk number 1, which I quite like. Double click, now it's in the scene, but where is it? It's here. So it's much too large compared to our little landscape, which is supposed to be a big landscape. So when we make this creature walk on our landscape, we need to scale the landscape up, which we won't because it already has the proper dimensions, but we need to scale him down. We do this by picking the walk reference and pressing R, which is the scaling tool, and now we scale him dramatically down. When we go to the side view, we see the dimensions. This is the height the creature should have. So we scale him even more down, like this. Really tiny. Don't be shy to scale the creatures down. Now let's unhide the plane. Shift H. So the landscape is here, and our creature is lower, so let's lower the landscape. Where is he? Here he is. We don't need to see the grid. Now this is our creature here, and now the dimensions are quite good. We can move it here, so he walks on that plane towards the high mountain. So he's really tiny. Now when we're in a movie and we produce a scene for the movie, we can work with the camera here. If the camera moves from this perspective closer to the character, the viewer gets an immediate impression of the dimensions of that mountain range and how small the little human is. When we open such a scene to the viewer, so the viewer sees this, he or she might not see the creature, the walking creature, immediately, although it's important. And one of the hints we can give him or her, the viewer, is to add props to the scene. And in a natural environment, we would plant trees here, we would place roads here, and in a science fiction movie, we would plant gigantic spaceships in the sky, for example. So let's introduce under Windows, General Editors, Content Browser, some props like a car. Let's double click the sedan car, and of course it comes in very, very large. The sedan is coming in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 objects because it includes the wheels. If we scale the sedan down, the wheels won't scale with it. So we pack it in a group, all the nodes here, Control G, and we scale the group down. And currently the group is scaled to 1, 1, 1 here. If we go to our walking reference here, he or she is scaled to 0.01. Now let's scale the group down to 0.01. Now we have a tiny car. It's so tiny that we can't see it anymore. Well, we can. It's right here. And you see it has the proper dimensions in relation to the creature. He is slightly taller than the car. That's basically what the dimensions cars do have. Maybe the car is a little bit too small. What do you think? Well, we can scale it up a little bit like this. And now we can imagine he can sit down in the car and drive away. And if we move the car, say there, and rotate it a little bit like this, and look at the whole scene from here, we immediately see that the viewer gets the impression of dimensions immediately. So this makes sense, and all of a sudden we have an orientation about all dimensions in the scene. Finally, let's introduce a plane which will convert into a spaceship. So General Editors, Content Browser, and here's the jet fighter. It's in the Maya props, so everybody can use it. Here's the jet fighter. We could scale him down, or it down, to 0.01 like all the others, which would make the size of a real jet fighter. 0.01, 0.01. So it's basically 1/100th of the original size. 0.01. You see, this actually makes sense. If you imagine this creature being the pilot of such a plane, yeah, he would fit in the plane quite all right. It would work out properly. The dimensions are okay. But if this is supposed to be a threatening spaceship attacking the people there, we can easily scale it up and animate it so it comes around the corner here, for example, which we won't do now because this is about dimensions and not about animation really. But it could come like hover here, for example, and then move down and really be intimidating to our creatures here, to the creature here, like this. Now we have the view is really drastic because that ship is so large. When we render this, we need a light, of course. Light's physical sky. So a physical sky is wrapping around the whole scene now. And if we want this spaceship here to be really drastic, we can, of course, render it with motion blur. So let's render it without motion blur first. I see our creature is a little bit over the surface and the light is not enough, so we need to lower him a little bit. Like this. Yeah, now it works out. And the light is in the sky dome light here. We just roughly adjust it. Okay. Now I free this window again. We can raise the intensity here. And of course we can change the physical sky azimuth, for example, by rotating the sun around the corner. You see now the the shadow of the mountain ranges affecting the whole scene. And now we're here and we have this gigantic ship now. Actually, it's not that gigantic. We can make it much taller, much bigger. But now we render it with motion blur. So let's keep this image for now by clicking here. It's not fully rendered. It's still waiting to be rendered here. And now we need to animate it, because motion blur has to do with animation. So let's say we're currently at frame 49. Let's set a keyframe for the plane here, or the spaceship here. And then we go to frame 60, so it really moves very, very fast, like this maybe. Now it's gone over our head. Set another keyframe, so that's the motion now. So let's render this scene now with motion blur. We go to render settings, and under the Arnold tab, you have motion blur, and you activate it, enable it. And now when you render the scene, you get a motion blurred plane, which immediately gives the viewer the impression of something dramatic happening here, whereas the car peacefully stands there. We can only hope that our creature reaches the car before that spaceship lands.